What's up, guys? We're back with another patron game analysis. In this game, we're looking at a game sent in by Rick. He was playing as black. He's 1156. And so if you're in that rating range, or even if you're not in that rating range, I think you're going to learn some things from this game. There was a couple of interesting moments with some good learning opportunities. So let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so here we go. D4, G6. Okay. D5. Okay, so this is like a Grunfeld setup. So Grunfeld is just like the King's Indian, where you feed Kettle the bishop over here. The only difference is the pawn goes to D5 instead of D6. But actually, you get some very different positions. But yeah, that's totally fine. Developing, great. Castling, awesome. B6. Okay, this is yeah, this is a viable way to develop the bishop. You do want to be a little bit careful along these white squares. Whenever you move a pawn like this, you have to just check, is there any dangers to the rook? In this case, I think black's fine, because if this happens, you can take, and if the bishop takes, you do have the the option to take with the knight. So I think it's totally fine here, but just want to, okay, he does play e4 and knight to h5. Okay, so knight to h5 looks like the idea is to try to trade the knight for the bishop, which is a viable option. I like that idea. Personally, I think I would have played it a move prior. So instead of b6, if you're going to go that route, I would play it right now, because the bishop can't retreat to e3. And now if white really wants to, they can probably, hold on to the bishop with bishop g5, but this just seems like a better time to do that than after b6. Once you play b6 and e4 happens, now I want to start thinking about controlling this diagonal with my bishop, because if this gets traded off, this gets opened up, and somehow white ends up getting a bishop there, you got to be really careful that you don't have problems with your rook. So I think probably the easiest way is to just capture, and then after, like, first of all, if the bishop takes, well, you just trade, and you're happy. You got the bishop pair, both of your bishops are active. This looks fantastic for black, right? So most likely white would recapture with the knight, and I wouldn't take this, because if you take that, then this is exactly what I'm talking about. You've really put yourself into a bad situation here, right? So what you would do is just play bishop b7 right now, and let white take here. If they want, you just simply take back, and I think black is doing just fine. This looks like a nice place for this bishop. So that's what I would have done at this point. And like I said, if you were going to do knight h5, I think you should have done it the move before this. But okay, that's a small thing. Bishop goes back to g3. Now bishop b7, that's good. e5, okay. Knight a6. Yeah, this is fine. I mean, it's a weird position because the center is kind of locked up like this. I think knight a6, I don't really know, like, where's it going. I mean, you could say it's threatening to go to b4, but white can very easily play c3, and then the knight's a little bit awkward over there. That being said, there's not a ton happening here, although I do think if it's on d7, maybe like after f6 and c5, it puts a little more pressure on the center, or even playing c5 now, followed by knight c6, I think it maybe is a better place for the knight. So not that this is terrible, but yeah, it just feels a little bit weird over there on the side. I think I would probably push this pawn forward and then get the knight behind it to attack the center. But okay, knight a6, c3, now c5. Yeah, so this is good. I mean, this is a good move. If you imagine the same position except the knight hopping over here, you can see how that's much better for black, right? More pressure on the center. All right, so c4, bishop back, bishop c8. This is okay. The bishop definitely is not doing a ton here, but when you do this, then you kind of block off your rooks. They're not coordinated. So I'm not sure that I would do this quite yet. Maybe I would move my queen or yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a tough position. I understand. Like, this is not an easy position to play by any means. So yeah, I'm okay with bishop c8 actually. Queen e2, queen to d7. All right, so queen d7, not a huge fan of this move. There's kind of a general principle a lot of times. When your queen is in front of the bishop like this, when you're making a battery and the queen's in front, there's only one time, I shouldn't say only, but there's usually only one time when this is good, and that's when you're going for checkmate. So if you imagine if this was lined up on the king somewhere, that could be a very good idea, right? In this case, there's no checkmate happening on h3, right? Even if white's king was castled there, you're not getting checkmate. Maybe if it was on this diagonal, right, there could be a checkmate threat. But because of that, it's usually not good to have the queen in front of the battery, because the queen is such a high value piece, right? Like, for example, would I consider moving my queen here and allowing this trade to happen? Well, no, right? I'm going to lose my queen for a bishop. Even though it's defended, I'm not going to do that. So if you switch these, well, then I could move my bishop and then trade, and then my queen would end up on f5. It makes more sense. So generally, I don't like to make moves like this where I'm putting my queen in front of a bishop unless it's, like I said, attacking the king. That's the exception. That's when you do want the queen to be in front because that leads to very nice batteries where you can get checkmate. But so yeah, that's not really a huge fan of that move in this position. Bishop h4. And this is the moment in the game when Rick had asked for specific advice on this position right here. So what I would do, and this is kind of a good lesson for everybody, when you get to a moment in a game like this and you're looking through it afterwards maybe, and you're like, really felt like this was the moment where I just lost it, or I didn't really know what to do. The first thing that I'm going to do is check the engine and see if there's any obvious moves. And the engine is telling me that the move to play is knight to f4. Okay, now that might not be immediately obvious why that's a good move. So what was played in the game was f6, and it was okay. This is not a bad move. This makes a lot of sense actually. You're attacking this pawn, and this is a good way to do it. So that, first of all, that move is fine. But let's try to figure out, why is knight f4 such a good move? So what I'm going to do is, and I'm looking at over at the engine on the side here, is I'm going to follow the line the engine recommends. So knight f4, and I'm also going to kind of pay attention to what's going on. So I'm noticing like I'm attacking this pawn and I'm attacking the queen. So if, it seems like the queen probably has to go to f1 to defend the pawn. And let me check the engine. That's what the engine says. Okay, any other move looks bad because you take this. All right. So queen f1. Excuse me, guys. And then I'm going to follow the line, okay, and it says queen to b5. We're attacking the pawn over here, and I'm still trying to figure out, like, why was this move so good, right? I don't get it yet. So I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep following the move. So I see this, and I'm going to just choose, like, what if white defends it? Logical move. What are we playing now? I'm checking the engine move. It's saying bishop to f5, okay. So I see that we're attacking the bishop. Most likely white's going to take me, okay. That's what the engine says. Takes, yes. And I'm still wondering, what was the deal with knight to f4, right? So what does it say white's move is? Queen to g1. Okay, and what are we going to do? Oh, knight to d3 check is the move. So now, finally, and I don't know how many moves this was, but you can see I'm starting to understand. This was the point behind knight f4, right? So that was kind of a long, line to think through, right? But basically what the engine is saying is this square on d3 is a weak square in white's camp. The only pieces defending it are the bishop and the queen, and the pawns that can defend that square have already been pushed forward, right? And we've got it supported by our pawn. So if we can get our knight into here and get rid of this bishop, that's going to be a very annoying knight. And Stockfish sees a way to do that. And that's why knight f4 is such a good move in this position. You play knight f4, you kick the queen away, it has to go to an awkward square. This is another thing. It's kind of awkward because white might have wanted to castle that way, right? Looks like we have a lot of space on the queen side, so this seems more risky. But now white can't castle because the queen's blocking the king, right? So that's kind of one thing. But then also, after we go here, it's with tempo, and then we can go bishop f5, forcing a trade of bishops, and then there we go, knight's coming into d3. So really cool idea, and this is how you would want to use Stockfish to help you get better at chess, basically, right? Because Stockfish finds these ideas really quickly, but sometimes we don't understand them, so that's why you follow out the line. Okay, I think you get the idea. All right. So that's why knight f4 would have been really good in that position. But that being said, f6, not a bad move at all. Okay, takes. And then right here, yeah, this is where Rick messed up. So this looks like a natural move, right? Your knight's kind of on the rim. Why not recapture, put the knight closer to the center where it's doing more stuff, right? Makes sense. The problem is this e5 square. If you let your opponent get a knight centralized like that, it's usually not good for you. And black could have taken with the pawn here, and now that knight is actually dominated. If you remember the video where I talked about different ways to use your pawns, one of the ways that I talked about was pawns can dominate knights. And what that means is a pawn just like this prevents the knight from moving forward. That's usually a good place for your pawn because the knight really doesn't have a lot of good options, right? Like, where's this knight going to move to? There's nowhere good unless he wants to sacrifice the piece. So this would have been a great move. You also get the benefit that you're now threatening to attack the king and the queen, so white has to deal with that threat. And your knight, even though it's on the edge of the board, it does have this nice f4 square that it looks like it can go to at some point in the future. And you can always move this and bring it back if you have to, but this stopping the knight from going in there is really, really a big deal, right? So what happens after knight takes f6 is now the knight comes in, and now black's actually in trouble. So queen here, and this is a very difficult position to play. Castle's long. So white kind of messed this up. This was not the correct approach. What white should have played was something like f4 or knight here to really solidify that knight in the center and make sure that they keep a piece there. Because that piece is never going to be able to move. I mean, yeah, we can maybe trade a couple pieces for it, but if white goes here and just keeps it defended, black's going to have a really tough time. And same thing with f4, you can get more support and have the pawn there. So, but white didn't do that, and now Rick actually does a nice maneuver here to try to trade it off. Again, f4 would have been a good move for white to support it. And by the way, if you're thinking to yourself, hold on a second, Nelson, isn't the pawn on f4 just undefended? It actually is, but if you take it, then bishop g3 happens. With tempo, you have to move your rook somewhere. Let's just say you go back here, and now white can play here. And basically, they sack the pawn, but look at this. There's going to be a piece just sitting here for a while, right? So we can trade a couple of them, but we end up with this annoying bishop in our face, right? And this is not good for us. It's going to take us at least 2 moves, and then we're still going to have a queen or a rook sitting there, and it's just like that whole square is very, very good for white. So anyway, I'm getting a little bit off track here, but the point is this e5 square was like very, very important in this game. And earlier recapturing with f6 would have just completely eliminated that. So, all right, rook e1, takes, and then here I think Rick just miscalculated that there wasn't enough pieces defending the bishop and lost the bishop. So that's a big blunder. Sometimes what you can do is calculate after you make the move, you know, okay, you have 1, white has 2, I'm going to lose that trade. Personally, I never used to really do that. I always would just kind of visualize the moves, you know, to see that. But some people I know have, you can just save some time by just counting. Like I have 1, they have 2. But I mean, it happens. Blunders happen sometimes. So that's what happened here. And the game went on, but at this point it was pretty equal. And the fact that, you know, black was down a piece was really the deciding factor in the game. So there wasn't much else to cover. I don't think in this game. Yeah, and so that's it. Black lost here. So overall, not a bad game by any means by Rick. The only thing, like I mentioned, let's go back real quick. The big takeaway was, let's see, we're probably right here. A lot of times c5 and then put the knight on c6 behind the c pawn is going to be a little bit better than going off to the rim. It's going to be more active. And if you remember later in the game, all the stuff that was happening around this e5 square, imagine if that knight, instead of being over on a6, would be on c6 defending, right? You can see how it would have been much more effective and much more difficult for white to do stuff. So it's those little things that they don't really seem like a big deal, but then later it's like, oh yeah, I really would have liked, you know, that to happen. You know, putting the queen in front of the bishop, it's good if you're lining up on the king. In this case, you're not really lining up on the king. It's probably not the way that I would have gone about doing that. Probably just bishop g4. That the bishop seems kind of awkward, and so getting rid of one of white's knights in this case seems like it might make sense, something like that. But yeah, that, and then right here recapturing with the pawn would have been a really nice move, just to dominate the knight and not give white the option of the knight e5. But other than that, pretty good game. But yeah, I hope you guys learned something from this, and if you want to have your games analyzed, check out Patreon. The link is below, and I'll see you guys soon.